2. So for those panel number 2 speakers, again, please turn on your cameras if you can and get ready with the unmute button as I introduce you. On the second panel today, we'll be discussing protecting sensitive data. And we have Allyson, Essex, the Acting First Secretary of the Health Economics and Modelling Branch in the Health Economics and Research Division of Department of Health. We have Paul Tyler, who leads the Data Privacy Team in Data 61. We have Waylon Nielsen, the Assistant Director, Data Access and Integration Section of Department of Social Services. We have Brendon Yenson, the Principal Software Engineer for Data 61's Privacy Enhancing Systems Group. And last but not least, we have Simon Nash, the Manager of Treasury's Data Policy and Projects Unit, who is charged with creating new data access opportunities and innovative data projects across government. Welcome everyone in panel number 2. Allyson, I'd love to start with you because I believe from some of our past conversations that you actually led some of the policy program on managing data sharing risks pre-PfOD. And given the significant challenges of 2020, no doubt sharing health data in a safe way has been very front of mind with you. Can you share with us some thoughts on this journey, and in particular about the context of sharing sensitive data and what it means?
Thanks so much. It's a real pleasure to be here today. And one of my great desires as a policy wonk is to see data better used to drive policy innovation and policy analysis. So in thinking about protecting sensitive data, I guess I've got 2 questions. And the first one is protecting sensitive data from what, and what makes the data sensitive? And I think sometimes we get into a bit of a mess because we don't answer those 2 questions. So I think in government, when we talk about protecting sensitive data, what we're really talking about is protecting, and I'll get to sensitive data in a minute, protecting it from unauthorised use, protecting it from improper use, and protecting it from dangerous use. So unauthorised, improper and dangerous. And the sensitive data is sensitive because it will make vulnerable people more vulnerable. It will affect the ability of government to do its job of governing, or it exposes us to a national security risk. So they're kind of the 3 things that happen. And personal privacy is, it makes people more vulnerable because if your identity is stolen or if you're unable to conduct your life without scrutiny, then those are the things that make things more difficult. So sometimes we make the mistake of thinking that we're protecting sensitive data from use by government. And it's really important to think about, will the use of this data enhance the ability of government to do things for the benefit of citizens and non-citizens alike? So I was involved in some work called the Priority Investment Approach, which was around assisting government to better manage the social security system for the benefit of all Australians. And in health, I've been involved in a range of things which are around better using health data to provide interventions or on-the-ground services, particularly in times of crisis. So if I talk you through the last 12 months in health, there was I understand that the National Incident Room has been stood up for more than 12 months continuously, and I don't think that's ever happened before. There was, before White Island, there was the measles issue in Samoa and Tonga. Then there was the White Island volcano, which was followed by bushfires, and I think those overlapped. And overlapped. And ever since, everyone's interested in health data. So it's about, how do you make the data available at the level that is needed for it to be useful, but not above that? So do you need individualized data? Do you need to individually link? Could you use population level or probabilistic matching instead? Do you need to protect the minimum size of cells to ensure that people can't be individually identified? And particularly health data is very sensitive because that can be misused by people who get hold of it and who don't have the desire to use it correctly. So they're my initial thoughts. I hope that they're helpful and provide some context, policy context around the discussion.
That's excellent, Allyson, and that does really provide some great context. And I like how you framed it up about what does make data sensitive, and then how do you protect it and protect it from what? I think that's a great way that we might run this discussion. And in fact, Waylon, you work for Department of Social Services, and if anyone's going to have sensitive data, I feel that it might be some of your constituents. You've been the technical lead on several PfOD projects, and I believe that looking at what makes data sensitive was one of the ones that you were working on. Can you share some thoughts on that?
Yeah, so that all started back in the really early days of PfOD, where as part of the open data agenda, this Department of Social Services really wanted to be proactive in participating in all of those projects, with things like the priority investment approach going, as well as a number of other projects to move our data out from being secure, but at the same time not breach privacy, because we have such sensitive data around factors like disability and other constraints that can actually significantly impair people's ability to participate in the marketplace. Now, for where we sat at the time, we reviewed what we were doing, and our delegates oftentimes were having to actually make these decisions in a vacuum of information. So we had decisions to release microdata or even just aggregated data where we really didn't actually understand how much risk we were purchasing each time we released a new data set. And that led to some of our earliest access projects with Data 61, including Sender, and the work that we did with Paul's area on R4 to actually really articulate just how risky these data sets were. I'm sure Paul's got plenty to say on R4, so I'll let him do that in a minute. But really the turn that we got from all of these various pieces of work and various projects was the risk was so high in these data sets, we needed to find a different way to actually work, rather than just effectively showering data off into the world and hoping that there was never going to be a breach. So we focused instead on how we bring researchers to the data with the tools they need to actually do the analysis that they can then do and release the findings, rather than release the data itself.
Now, that makes a lot of sense. And, you know, when we think about this work about trying to identify and understand the privacy risks in data, it is so important and is such a developing area. Now, Paul, that's been where you spent a lot of your work. I'd be really keen if you could share with our lovely audience here, what are some of the key learnings or advice that you could give about how you assess the risk in data and whether it is or is not sensitive?
Yeah, so one of, as Waylon mentioned, one of our early PfOD projects was the Reidentification Risk Ready Reckoner. You can see why we call it R4, because it's a bit of a tongue twister. But what PfOD enabled us to do was actually build on some research work that we as researchers could implement and use on a one-to-one basis with agencies, but move that more towards a tool that others could use. And that particular tool looks at re-identification risk in unit record data and in event-based data. And we're still moving that along.
Can you just explain what re-identification risk is for our participants on the phone in case they're not familiar with it?
Yeah, sure. So obviously we re-identify each other by names and addresses and things like that. But within data, there can be things that are called quasi-identifiers, and that could be something as simple as your salary and your employer. If your salary is unique within your employer, then those two pieces of information could act as identifiers for you. And so anyone who knows those two pieces of information could re-identify you. And we've seen a number of there've been a number of cases that have actually hit headlines, the more recent being the MyKey example in Victoria, where it's the data itself which can be tied to an individual, and then you can learn more about an individual from that. So R4 helps identify that risk, but the more recent project we've been working on with APRA is about aggregated data, and when you're suppressing data, but where there's relationships between the data, there's this risk that you might be someone may be able to reconstruct values that you think you've hidden. And so how do you assess that risk?
Got it. Excellent. Thank you for that. And Simon, we might bring you into the conversation here too. While I recognise you're from Treasury and Treasury isn't APRA, no doubt you've got just the same complications with all the types of data that you have to deal with. I understand that you are one of the driving forces behind a multi-agency project that kind of talk through how you can share in a secure fashion. Can you talk us through some of the work that you've done?
Sure, thanks for that. Now we were very grateful to the support provided by Andrew Layla and my previous band too, Dan Andrews, who set up the lead project. With I think there was around 10 agencies involved in the project committee, including the ABS, AHW, and CSIRO Data 61. The objective there was to work to establish a prototype of the capacity to follow workers and firms over time using linked employer-employee data, which you'd understand then by definition is sensitive data. And once you link workers and firms together, it becomes very easy to re-identify.
As we just heard from Paul, absolutely.
Yeah. So one of the things that we thought we would use the project for was to experiment and to understand what could potentially be done. And I still remember Bill Simpson-Young, I think it was at the first lead project committee meeting, talking about the potential to leverage off some of the distributed technologies that Data 61 had been developing in partnership with Waylon's team in DSS, and to actually use this as an opportunity to link these all up and actually trial and see if we could prototype a distributed system. So it was my pleasure to be involved to assist. And one of the things that we did was we set up a partnership with ATO, DSS, and Department of Education. We put forward two PfOD proposals, which we were successful for, and we're very grateful for the funding. I think it was around 1.5 million, which provided some seed funding for Data 61 to demonstrate the potential for a distributed data sharing system. And the idea essentially was to link up a non-link. So Data 61's privacy preserving record linkage tool, which would pull the data in from the custodians. So the idea would be that in a sense, the data would remain with the custodian. And in a very transient sense, it would then be pulled into a virtual data access control center, which it would be analysed, and they developed a new tool which they called Verta, which demonstrated the potential to then also work with another one of the tools that Waylon mentioned before, Sender, to provide that sensitive data access workflow tool. And then we were sort of experimenting with options for providing access depending upon the user's accreditation, where you could potentially draw in the Protari tool, which has been demonstrated to work very effectively with the ABS as a statistical disclosure tool. So I think the key benefits was that the project did demonstrate the potential. It opened up some of the limitations as well and the potential for more work that's required, particularly around the issues that Andrew pointed out at the beginning, and it's been like we brought up through these conversations around the fundamental importance of data quality and standards. For a system like that was being described and is developed, it works well when you've got high quality structured data like the ATO data. But what's important, I think, is to remember it's the quality of the underlying data. It's critical into the output if it's being pulled together like this. I think where we landed was that there's opportunities to continue to refine this technology to assist with the data sharing of sensitive data. And I'm hopeful and look for opportunities there for a hybrid model for existing data integrating agencies, as they've been doing with Protari and other technologies, to expand on this offering that Data 61's demonstrated its potential for, but I think still needs more calibration. And I think there's a lot of opportunities that will be opened up under the new Data Availability and Transparency Act that ONDC has been progressing, and with hope that will be introduced to Parliament in the foreseeable future. So I think I'll leave it at that. Thank you for the opportunity to participate today. Any questions or any comments, more than happy to have a chat.
Excellent, Simon. Thank you so much for that. And look, it is really great to hear the potential benefits that these types of really cutting edge technologies can bring. I know that when I first came and joined this organisation, the privacy preserving area was one of the globally leading areas in this space. So I guess before we wind this panel, I'd love to bring Brendon in. Brendon, you're one of the principal engineers of the group that developed all this cool tech in the first place. I'm super keen to hear from you. What are any of the learnings that you might be able to share with the rest of the participants? We heard from Simon that getting your foundations right and getting the right data is really critical. What are the other learnings that you might be able to share?
So one of the things that's been quite difficult for us is, and I imagine it would be for anything that's between departments, is it's an experimental technology, and how do you which comes first, the chicken or the egg? How do you first of all trust your real data to this tool that you don't have faith in yet, but you can't get faith in the tool without having access to the data. So that's quite difficult. And I guess the other thing that's a challenge that we need to look at maybe next is how well do our technologies scale to 20, 30 million users over 20, 30, 40, 50 years. That's an awful lot of data to be linking and moving about. So there's one technical and one, I don't know if you would call it regulatory, but one non-strictly technical things that we need to look out for.
That's really valuable, Brendon. I guess that touches on a couple of things that Andrew mentioned earlier today, which was around maybe that culture. So that's building that culture of trust, that in order to test the sharing, we've got to trust the data and we've got to touch each other. And how do we do that? But also, you know, into a lot of these conversations, this type of projects that PfOD has produced has moved us forward, like we now have these privacy preserving technologies. But what if we actually put all of our data in there? How do we then manage that going forward? So it just gives us new technical challenges that we need to look into in the future.